Welcome once again to Quick Trivia with Mike. It's that weekly quiz show right here on Channel 955 where we ask you a series of questions and challenge you to either rack your memory or maybe do a little bit of research and come up with the answers. You know, we always begin with revealing the answers from 3 questions last week, and then we give you 3 new questions for this week. I am your host and quizmaster, Mike Brever. As always, I'm joined by my producer and cameraman, Scott McFerrin, but you actually never get a chance to see him. Let's get right into it, shall we, and come up with the answers for last week. For those of you who watched last week, you know that we gave you 3 what I think are some really interesting and challenging questions. We gave you a little bit of history about Alexander Mitchell, the Scottish immigrant who rose to prominence right here in the Milwaukee area, became a banker, a well-known railroad tycoon at that time. His home was built on what is now known as Wisconsin Avenue. Back then it was Grand Avenue. And he actually called that home Mitchell Manor. It's what is now known as the Wisconsin Club. I told you a little bit about Alexander Mitchell's son, John Mitchell. Not the John Mitchell from Watergate fame, but John Mitchell, the son of Alexander Mitchell. He was very notable in his own right, a Civil War military officer, a philanthropist, became an elected official serving in the state legislature. He also went off to the United States Senate. He didn't live as an adult at the Mitchell Manor, the ancestral home on Wisconsin Avenue. He went off and built his own home in what is now known as West Allis. It was on the south side of the city of Milwaukee, actually just off Lincoln Avenue. John Mitchell actually created a sprawling estate of 240 acres along the Kinnickinnick River, and it was anchored by a 20-room Queen Anne home. However, listing this as just a house really doesn't do justice to the once lush and sprawling estate on those 240 acres. It was built by John and Harriet Mitchell in 1885, again as what we now know as West Allis. The estate once again featured the 20-room Queen Anne mansion, a private horse track, stables, and farmlands. John Mitchell also, as I mentioned to you last week, was the father of famed Milwaukeean Billy Mitchell, whom Mitchell International Airport is named for. So really a family of great prominence. I asked you, what was that South Side home named? And I pointed out that it's a name that's very prominent in retirement communities today. Well, it was known as Meadowmere. Meadowmere is what John and Harriet Mitchell named their home just off Lincoln Avenue in what is now known as West Allis. Again, Billy Mitchell grew up in that home. As in all things, good or bad, typically they come to an end. In 1924, 20 years after the passing of John Mitchell, the Carmelite sisters bought 8 acres with the home on it and used it to create an orphanage for young girls. In 1936, Archbishop Stritch of the Milwaukee Archdiocese asked for the orphans to be relocated and sold the estate so that it could become a home for the aged, which it has been ever since. The remaining 240 acres sold off and subdivided and became a substantial residential neighborhood in West Allis. A very prominent feature of Meadowmere is a sculpture of 2 dogs. They're the Vizia dogs, which once adorned Mitchell Manor, the Wisconsin Club. and was brought to the south side, Meadowmere Mitchell Manor. Every Meadowmere retirement community today has a replica of those two dogs on it. So there you have it. That's the answer to question number 1. John and Harriet Mitchell created Meadowmere on the south side, and you all know Meadowmere is a very prominent name today in retirement communities in and around the Milwaukee area. In fact, my own mother lived in Meadowmere Mitchell Manor in Oak Creek for 13 years before her passing. Question number 2. We told you a great deal about the 1939 World's Fair. We told you about the fact that the greeter at the World's Fair left to take a job with RKO Pictures to take a prominent role in the filming of Little Men. We asked you, who was that greeter at the 1939 World's Fair? A little bit of a trick question. Many of you were probably thinking of a movie star or a radio entertainer, maybe even a recording star of that era. No, it was none other than Elsie the Cow. Originally, Elsie the Cow was a cartoon character developed as a mascot for the Borden Dairy Company. First used in 1936 by Borden, and it symbolized the perfect dairy product. Since the demise of Borden in the 1990s, the character has continued to be used in the same capacity for the company's partial successor, Eagle brand. How many of you knew that Eagle was the successor of Borden Dairy? And it's owned by the J.M. Smucker Company. Elsie the Cow was actually named one of the top 10 advertising icons of the 20th century by Ad Age in 2000. Elsie the Cow has been among the most recognizable product logos in the United States and Canada. Again, first created in 1936 by a team headed by advertising creative director David William Reed. Elsie first appeared as one of 4 cartoon cows, along with Mrs. Blossom, Bessie, and Clara, in a 1936 magazine advertisement series. The first actual living Elsie was a registered Jersey heifer, selected while participating in the Borden's 1939 New York World's Fair Rhodolactor exhibit, and as you now know, because of our questioning from last week, went off to become an official greeter for that fair. She spent the rest of the season on display twice each day, dressed in an embroidered green blanket. Again, in 1940, the actual cow Elsie left the 1939 World's Fair and appeared in the film Little Men with a starring role as Buttercup. Elsie has also been bestowed with such tongue-in-cheek honorary university degrees as Doctor of Bovinity, Doctor of Human Kindness, Doctor of Economics. In Wisconsin, home of the Dairy Princess, Elsie was named Queen of Dairyland. The Seneca people named her an honorary chief, and the city of Bridgeport, Connecticut, presented her with their P.T. Barnum Award of Showmanship. So there you have it. Elsie the Cow left a starring role at the 1939 New York World's Fair and took a starring role as Buttercup in the RKO production of Little Men. Our third and final question from last week delved off a little bit into Hollywood lore. We talked to you about the Harry Potter series of books and films, as authored by J.K. Rowling. We told you that one of the ongoing anomalies of the Harry Potter series is the fact that at the conclusion of the filming of the first movie in that series, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, up to 100 scenes had to be refilmed. And we asked you why. The reason for that is that in the United States, the movie is known as Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. throughout Great Britain, where the series are authored, and actually throughout the rest of the European Union, it is known as Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. J.K. Rowling actually penned it as Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, but after she first sold her first book to a British publishing company, she then brought it to Scholastic Corporation here in the United States, and they felt that Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone didn't give away enough of what the book was going to be about. Magic and witchcraft and sorcery and things like that. So, at the request of, actually at the insistence of Scholastic Corporation, the name was changed to Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. As a result of that, two versions of the movie were made. One for European audiences, one for audiences here in the United States. It was always referenced as the Philosopher's Stone that Harry Potter was seeking in the first book. In the United States, it was the Sorcerer's Stone. Ironically, we all know now from our introduction last week that the series was originally targeted at children ages 9 to 11, but it's become a worldwide phenomenon for children of all ages. I myself have actually read all 7 of the books as well. I know my daughter is a huge fan of them. She's read them all, and she's a 30-year-old adult. She actually owns the entire box set of all 8 Harry Potter movies. You know, there's one more movie than there is books, because the final chapter of the saga was split into 2 movies. I'm sure just to make a little bit more money for Hollywood. An interesting thing about this, however, is that not only was the first book title changed to please the United States audience, but J.K. Rowling was asked to change her name. Her actual name is Joanne Rowling. But again, her publishers felt that a woman penning these wonderful, wonderful stories would only appeal to an audience of young girls. So they insisted that she change her pen name from Joanne Rowling to J.K. Rowling, which was a little bit more of an androgynous title, and it would appeal to young boys and young girls. Nobody had any idea at that time, once again, that it would appeal to children of all ages. So there you have it. The answer to question number 3 is that it was originally penned as Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, but in the United States they named it Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and when they talked about what they were seeking in that book, in the film making of that book, they had to have the actors use either Philosopher's Stone or Sorcerer's Stone, depending upon which version of the movie they were looking at. Those are the 3 questions. Elsie the Cow, Philosopher's Stone, and of course Meadowmere. We had several players this past week. We had one that got all 3 questions correct. All 3 questions correct. Alex Hill. Welcome back to the winner's circle, Alex. Now, as you know, if we have 2 or more players get the same number of questions correct, we do have a built-in tiebreaker. The tiebreaker is to identify the bumper music that my producer, Scott McFerrin, adds to the beginning of the show and the end of the show. As it just so happens, Alex also got the tiebreaker correct, but it wasn't necessary because he got all 3 questions correct and was the only player to do so. The tiebreaker is that the music from last week's show was Linus and Lucy. It's also potentially known as Peanuts, which Kelvin Schrader got correct, by the way. He identified the bumper music. You probably know it. It was first played for the Peanuts Christmas special that was aired, I believe, I'll look this up for a future show. It was aired in 1965, I believe, for the very first time. So it's been around now for 55 years, one of the most beloved holiday specials of all time. As long as we're talking about last week's show, let's talk about previous episodes for a minute. About 3 months ago, I told you that there was a president, the earliest serving president, who had a grandchild still alive. Turned out to be John Tyler, after we did all the research on that, and several of you got that correct. I'm saddened to say that that grandchild passed away about 2 months ago, in his 90s, of course. So that trivia question has now come to its fruition, and the grandchildren of John Tyler have now passed away. I'll try to find out for future shows who is the earliest serving president with current grandchildren still alive. But let's get into this week's questioning, shall we? We're going to talk a little bit of seasonality here. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a Halloween tradition, jack-o'-lanterns. Jack-o'-lanterns, as you know, is a carved pumpkin associated with Halloween. Children all over the states love to do this. You go to a pumpkin patch or go to your local store, buy a pumpkin, cut the top off, hollow out the inside, and put a clever face on it. Its name comes from the phenomenon of a strange light flickering over peat bogs, called a will-o'-the-wisp or a jack-o'-lantern. The name is also tied to the Irish legend of Stingy Jack, a drunkard who bargains with Satan and is doomed to roam the earth with only a hollowed pumpkin to light his way. Jack-o'-lanterns are a yearly Halloween tradition that came to the United States primarily from ancestors of mine, Irish immigrants. You know, there was a great influx of Irish immigrants in the 1840s because of the Irish potato famine, and they brought a lot of their traditions with them. The jack-o'-lantern was one of them. Now, there is, of course, reference to jack-o'-lanterns in previous American literature, but it's the Irish who really brought it to prominence here in the States. The term jack-o'-lantern, again, was originally used to describe the phenomenon ignis fatuus, literally foolish fire, known as will-o'-the-wisp in English literature. Again, it comes to us from the Irish. It's also been suggested that the jack-o'-lanterns originally represented Christian souls in purgatory, as Halloween is the eve of All Saints' Day, November 1st. Halloween actually is All Hallows' Eve, which is the eve of All Saints' Day. Again, I told you that the Irish brought it to real prominence, but there is reference to jack-o'-lanterns in previous American literature. Adaptations of Washington Irving's short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which was published in 1820, often show the headless horseman with a jack-o'-lantern in place of his severed head. In the original story, actually, a shattered pumpkin is discovered next to Ichabod Crane's abandoned hat on the morning after Crane's supposed encounter with the headless horseman, supposedly a Hessian officer from the Revolutionary War who lost his head in battle. My question to you is that when the Irish first brought this, it wasn't necessarily a pumpkin that they were talking about carving out. What was it that the Europeans typically used instead of a pumpkin to create a jack-o'-lantern? That's question number one. What was used instead of a pumpkin to create a jack-o'-lantern? Question number two. Let's go off a little bit into sports history, shall we? We're going to talk a little bit about a rare feat in professional baseball, the no-hitter. Also known as a no-hit game, colloquially, I'll try to get that out, colloquially, a no-no is a game in which a team was not able to record a single hit. Major League Baseball officially defines a no-hitter as a completed game in which a team that batted in at least 9 innings records no hits. It's a great topic for us given the fact that the World Series will be starting soon. Right now we're in the National League Championship Series and the American League Championship Series, but the World Series will begin imminently. The most recent Major League no-hitter by a single pitcher was thrown on September 13th, 2020. And I mention by a single pitcher because baseball now recognizes a group effort. If a starting pitcher goes 6 innings, let's say, and gives up no hits, and a reliever comes in, or 2 or 3 or 4 relievers to finish the game, and again no hits are recorded, it's considered a group no-hitter. But the most recent no-hitter by a single pitcher was by Alec Mills of the Chicago Cubs against our own beloved Milwaukee Brewers at Miller Park. The most recent combined no-hitter was August 3rd, 2019. Aaron Sanchez, Will Harris, Joe Biagini, Chris Javinsky of the Astros did it against the Seattle Mariners at Minute Maid Park. It is possible, however, to reach base without getting a hit. If you do so, it still maintains the no-hitter. You can reach base with a walk, by an error, getting hit by a pitch. Other possibilities include an uncaught third strike, literally an error on the part of the catcher, or a wild pitch by the pitcher. Catcher's interference, even a fielder's choice. A no-hitter in which no batters reach base. No batters reach base at all, over 27 batters, is called a perfect game. And that is a much rarer feat. The pitcher who holds the record for most no-hitters, of course, is Nolan Ryan. He threw 7 of them in his 27-year career. His first 2 came exactly 2 months apart while he was with the California Angels in 1973. He tossed his 7th and final no-hitter at the age of 44 when he became the oldest pitcher to throw a no-hitter. 36 pitchers have thrown more than 1 no-hitter. But of course, as I just explained, Nolan Ryan has the most with 7. Two pitchers have actually pitched no-hitters while not having a non-pitching hand. They were one-handed pitchers, and they threw no-hitters. Hugh Daly of the Cleveland Blues defeated the Philadelphia Quakers on September 13, 1983. Much more famous because it was in the modern era. Jim Abbott of the New York Yankees defeated the Cleveland Indians 4-0 on September 4th, 1993. Daly lost his left hand in a gun accident as a child. Abbott was born without his right hand. He was a left-hander because he had no right hand. There have been 305 no-hitters in Major League history. There have only been 21 perfect games in the modern era. There were 2 more in the 19th century. Milwaukee County Stadium has only seen 5 no-hitters. Now that's not Miller Park, soon to be American Family Park, I believe, but it's Milwaukee County Stadium only had 5 no-hitters. Jim Wilson in 1954, the Braves beat the Phillies 2-0. Lou Burdette, the Braves beat the Phillies 1-0 in 1960. Warren Spahn, the Braves beat the Phillies 4-0. Phillies were a very popular target in those days. Also in 1960, Warren Spahn in 1961, the Braves finally beat somebody else. They beat the Giants. And then in 1974, Steve Busby, the Royals beat the Brewers 2-0. There is an anomaly about perfect games and Milwaukee County Stadium that I find fascinating, and maybe you do as well. 12 innings of a perfect game were thrown in 1959 by a single pitcher who is not recorded as having pitched a no-hitter or a perfect game. He threw 12 innings of perfect ball in 1959. Who was that pitcher? And why is he not officially recognized as having thrown a no-hitter or a perfect game? That's question number 2. Question number 3. Let's take a little bit of look at pandemics and the city of Milwaukee. You all know that we're right now in the midst of the coronavirus, a horrible thing that we're all enduring right now. And I hope you understand that we're doing everything we can at East Castle Place to keep all of you and our staff as well safe and healthy and able to enjoy as wonderful of a life in the midst of this pandemic as possible. But we're not looking at the coronavirus. I want to go back to 1920. We're going to take a look at the Spanish flu, the previous pandemic that hit the city of Milwaukee. It actually was an H1N1 virus. It began in 1918. The influenza pandemic was the most severe pandemic in recent history. Again, it was caused by an H1N1 virus with genes of bird origin. Although there is not universal consensus where the virus originated. The first known case was on a military base in the state of Kansas. It actually spread through that base like wildfire. Most of those victims recovered, and they were shipped overseas because in 1918 the United States was still involved in World War I. In fact, World War I didn't end until November of 1918. So we were shipping soldiers, doughboys, overseas, and it's believed, not verified, but believed that those soldiers took the Spanish flu with them when they went over there. It's estimated that about 500 million people, or 1/3 of the world's population, became infected with this virus. The number of deaths was estimated to be at least 50 million worldwide, with 675,000 occurring in the United States. Now remember, the Spanish flu lasted from 1918 through 1920. And of course, when you have that many people contracting the virus, it is possible to have herd immunity by the time it's all done. But what a bitter price we had to pay. 500 million people infected, 50 million people worldwide dying, 675,000 in the United States alone. Even by modern standards, the scope of the epidemic is absolutely staggering. Between September and December of 1918, influenza and related pneumonia debilitated almost 103,000 Wisconsinites. And let's focus on Wisconsin and Milwaukee in particular. During that 4-month period, September through December, 103,000 people in Wisconsin contracted the virus. 8,459 were killed by it. That's approximately 7,500 more fatalities than what we would have expected in a normal year from the flu. To gauge the magnitude of the crisis, consider that more Wisconsin residents died during the 6 months of the influenza epidemic in 1918 than were killed in World War I, the Korean War, and the Vietnam conflict combined. Only the Civil War and World War II claimed more Wisconsin lives. Of course, you all know the influenza was not simply a global pandemic. 20 million people were killed during the summer and fall of 1918 because American doughboys potentially took it over from that military base in Kansas. more than the total number of soldiers who died in 4 years of unremitting slaughter in World War I. It would ultimately kill, once again, 50 million individuals. Ironically, Spain has nothing whatsoever to do with the Spanish flu. You now know that it began at the beginning of World War I, and it went over to Europe after first being recognized as an epidemic at a military base in Kansas. Why is it known as the Spanish flu? World War I was primarily fought in Northern Europe. Papers in Northern Europe were very focused on the struggle, the slaughter that was going on in the trenches, and the brutal warfare that had gone on for 4 years already. Stories about the H1N1 flu that were traversing around Europe at that time weren't the headlines in the newspaper. Spain, however, was a neutral country in World War I. And as a result of that, their newspapers were full of the stories of the impact of the flu on society as a whole. As a result of that, because most people became very familiar with it because of Spanish newspapers, it's known as the Spanish flu. An unfortunate fluke in history. People had no idea how to treat it. In fact, the influenza virus would not be viewed under an electron microscope for another 15 years. They didn't know what caused it, they didn't know how it spread. Ironically, it was spreading through the air. People were coughing, they were sneezing, people were getting sick. Many people recovered from it, obviously, as you now know, but people who didn't died a horrible death. Black liquid would form in their lungs and they'd become congested, and eventually it would kill them. Again, the disease struck Wisconsin about 6 weeks before World War I ended on November 11th, 1918. The states of the upper Midwest, however, were really successful in preventing flu deaths compared to the rest of the country. The percent of people that died as a percent of population in the Midwest was about half of what it was throughout the rest of the country. About 2% compared to 4% of the population throughout the rest of the country. Comparing deaths as a percent of population, however, here in the city of Milwaukee, let's take a look at pandemics. In 2020, there are 592,000 people living in the city of Milwaukee. To date, we've had 549,000 coronavirus deaths. That's about 0.09% of the Milwaukee population. 0.09%. The Spanish flu, 457,000 people living in Milwaukee. 1,292 deaths as a result of it. 0.28% of the population. Tremendously higher than what we're experiencing today. However, as you know, we still don't have a vaccine or a cure. So the true death toll of the coronavirus is ultimately yet to be discovered. Those two viruses, however, can't hold a stick to an epidemic that coursed through the city of Milwaukee in the middle of the 19th century. Milwaukee at that time had 20,000 residents. 300 people died from it. That was 1.5% of the population. Literally 6 times the amount of people that died from the Spanish flu, and exponentially more as a percent of population of the coronavirus. When did that epidemic take place, and what was it? So there you have it. What mid-19th century epidemic coursed through Milwaukee and took 1.5% of the population? Those are your 3 questions for today. Again, get your answers to me by noon on Monday. You can email me at mbrevertyscastleplace.com. You can phone me at 963-8425. Write your answers on a sheet of paper, slide them under my office door, or put them in my mailbox behind the concierge desk. If I gave you that email address and phone number too fast, just call the receptionist. They'll give it to you. That's our show for this week. If you didn't pay attention to the bumper music at the beginning of the show, pay attention to the bumper music at the end. As you know, that's our tiebreaker. If 2 or more of you get the same number of questions correct, you could enter the winner's circle and be next week's champion by getting the bumper music correct. That's our show for this week. I'd like to thank the management here at Channel 955, our president Tyler Gudex, our executive producer Laura Wengler, our producer and my producer and cameraman Scott McFerrin, and of course our artistic director Cooper Ledvina. I'm your host and quiz master Mike Brever. This has been Quick Trivia with Mike. Until next week, I ask you all to please stay safe and be smart and be patient. We will all be together soon enough to enjoy that wonderful East Castle Place hospitality. So long, everybody. Have a great week.